3 out of 4 employees don't feel safe telling the truth to their boss. That's actually a McKinsey number. Most leaders hear the words psychological safety and they'll either roll their eyes or they may think, I'm not sure if everybody's going to be accountable if I do that. It actually means neither. There's a Google study that studied 180 teams, and they found that the ones that had psychological safety were twice as likely to be rated as high-performing teams. It also retained their talent at much higher rates. In this episode, we're going to talk about what it actually takes to build those kind of teams and sustain them. And joining me today is Dr. Jeff Kaplan, Executive Leadership Coach. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Raj. Great to be here.
All right, let's say you're in a room with a CEO who just finished having a presentation to his staff. They look at the staff and they say, any concerns? And everybody's silent. So he takes that as alignment. What's actually happening in that room?
Yeah, that's great. There's not a psychological safety. Yeah, that's great. What happens, unfortunately, is after the meeting, people talk about what they really think.
Executive doesn't hear.
They don't hear because they're not there. In that Google Project Aristotle study that you quoted,
Yes.
there was one team that their decisions went up by 30 to 40% just because they felt safe to say it in the room and not behind their back. And look, quite frankly, I see this a lot. A lot of times, even you get teams that everybody loves each other and the leader speaks and people don't dissent. They don't just not only dissent with the leader, they don't dissent with each other because one of the norms that has not been stated or agreed upon is it's okay to disagree.
There's another executive I'm thinking about. This guy's got pretty high standards. He's a bright person, very hard worker, very disciplined, and his team has completely stopped challenging him. He doesn't even know that they've stopped challenging him. Well, what created that? How common is that at a CXO level?
I'd love to tell you what to do about it too.
Yeah.
It's very common. I was coaching somebody, I worked with their team for 18 months. And one of the things that we did is we created a language, literally a tool where people took turns, basically this is an easy way to say it, like a simplified way of saying it, but of dissenting, right? So in that scenario, it's if I was that CEO, it's okay, that sounds like everybody agrees, great. Okay, now I want to go around and I want everybody to tell me why it's a bad idea. And if you don't come up with a reason for this bad idea, then I'm not going to be happy, right? No punishment. But so everybody tell me what's good about this idea, and now tell me everybody what's bad about this idea. Now I'm going to leave the room, and I want you guys to talk amongst yourselves and come up with some improvements about this idea. And I'll be back in 45 minutes to see what you have to say.
So that's an active mode that executive can be in and just like use that strategy to start pulling stuff out of people. And does that create psychological safety?
It helps, right? So it starts at the top. So the question I would want to know is what's really going on? Because you also might have weird dynamics between the people in the room, like between team members, right? Somebody sabotaging somebody else, somebody hates somebody else, somebody's very new, and maybe the new people and the old people that have been there forever aren't really aligned. And I would quite frankly want to start with a team assessment. One of the things that we're actually working on right now, an online version, which is and get everybody to anonymously state what they think is working well within this team, what's not working well, and what suggestions do they have to improve it. And then from that, I know that you asked what to do about it, but then from that, have a retreat, right? And a coach who's working with the leader and the team to help figure out what changes we want to make, and ideally come up with a charter or a set of norms about how to operate.
When I hear from some leaders, every now and then you'll hear someone say, if everybody feels safe like that, is there accountability? And so I think sometimes there's a little bit of tension where an executive might want to understand, how do I make sure that people are still held accountable, but they also feel safe?
That's why it starts with accountable for what? So people say, oh, they're underperforming. Okay, well, the goal is clear. Did you actually say, okay, what did you hear me say? Were the metrics of success very clear? Were they defined? Was there a
Let me
timeline?
dissect that one thing, because you said something I think that so many leaders just skip over. And that is the feedback loop that you create in the conversation is when you're having that dialogue with a team member, you stop and you say, "What did you hear me say?" To me,
Yes.
that's one of the most valuable things an executive or anybody who's in management can do. Can you just talk to that for a minute? What that
I will, yes, and I'll tell you, every time I do that with one of my directs,
Yeah.
it's never 100% correct, never.
Right.
No matter
Yeah.
how great that person is.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? And it's
Yeah.
because we have our we own paradigms, our own values, our own biases. Like, really quickly, I give this example sometimes. It was many years ago, experiment done with kittens, right? I think I mentioned this to you maybe once, Raj, in a different podcast, where they split the kittens in 2 rooms. The kittens that were born with nothing, they put in a room with nothing but vertical lines and raised that way, and other kittens were put in a room with nothing but horizontal lines. And then when they became cats, they put them in a normal room. The kittens that were raised in nothing but horizontal lines bumped into everything vertical, and the kittens that were raised in vertical lines bumped into everything horizontal. They didn't even see it. And so now just think at a human level, we develop our own assumptions, paradigms, and so we don't see it. So as a leader, it's really helpful to just say, let's just repeat what we heard say and just make sure that we're all clear and on the same page.
That's interesting. So walk me through that moment when a leader realizes, and maybe it's a coaching session with you or it's an experience that they're having with their team, that they're actually getting the input that they need instead of being the boss instead of a leader.
Say, can you say more about that? When you say,
Yeah, like let me rephrase. What does it look like when a leader realizes that their team is actually starting to feel that psychological safety? What are the
there's
leader?
healthy, one is there's healthy debate in the room. Like, I disagree with what you're saying. I mean, the part that I agree with is this, and I think we're missing this other piece. And people are doing and, yeah, and instead of but or you're wrong. In a meeting, it's not just yes or silence, like the example that you gave, right? So when you think of a group coming together, like a team, having a team meeting, ideally they're all there because decisions are being made that require the engagement of that team, right? And in order to come up with it, think about you. Think about when you're trying to make a decision, you're trying to think about it from all sides and you're kind of wondering, what am I missing? So you're doing your internal debate. There should be external debate, right? Healthy discussion, disagreement, and agreement. And then eventually everybody coming, if it's a consensus decision, not everything needs to be a consensus decision. If it's a consensus decision, everybody coming to a place where they can be comfortable with a particular decision. And then once that decision is made, everybody lines up and executes on that decision.
How do you coach an executive to know that they may not have that psychological safety built
Y-
into their teams?
You have to do a team assessment or if it's around the executive, you could do a 360 feedback session, which we've done a podcast in
So
the
you
past.
need third party data really. Yeah, like
You,
that third party, you need internal data. You can't rely on just a coaching session with the executive.
yeah, you need anonymous feedback, right? You just need you if you haven't created a feedback loop,
Mhm.
right? So ideally, you've created a feedback loop where people are comfortable. They respect your position or authority, but they're comfortable disagreeing with you. And again, I would say as a leader, help them with that. Say, does everybody, I don't mean to purposely trick them, but for example, what do people think about that? And then there's silence. And then you could say, I think it's a dumb idea, actually. I was just thinking about it on the way here, but I think it's a dumb idea. Anybody want to guess why I think it's a dumb idea? Right? Do things like that, get them comfortable with disagreement. You could even make a game out of it. It doesn't have to be weird.
So let me go back to that executive who's in the room, basically said, "Here's the plan. Any concerns?" And everybody was silent. Now, let's say that executive becomes aware that maybe they may be shutting out people, that there's not psychological safety. So, what are some of the ways that person can then start to, because they have to change behavior in themselves, to start to get their team comfortable with these types of dialogues? You painted a really clear picture of what a healthy conversation looks like. But when you're not in that yet, people might get suspicious. Like they can't just go from I got to be really careful what I say, to suddenly feeling open. So there's that transition. So how do you walk them through as a leader? What would you advise the leader to do?
All right. So if I said do a 3-step process, step one is you have to name it, right? So I've noticed in the last 3 months of our conversations, there's been crickets. There's been no debate. Nobody's ever disagreed with me. That's a problem,
Mm.
right? So I'd like to change that. In an effort to change that, I'd like to, I would like to truly encourage pushback, healthy debate. And then let's start in this meeting, right? So I'm going to be looking for that, right? So you can just name it, right? Step two is for the leader to tell on themselves, right? Meaning, so for example, by the way, I was late, or I realize I haven't modeled that, right? I haven't really pushed back on the group. And so you're going to see me doing that a little bit more and it's going, and you can say, the leader can say it's going to be awkward at first because we're not used to doing this. But I would say, by the way, a step 1.5 is making sure that you're doing other things on a regular basis, acknowledging people, pizza parties, whatever, like doing little things that build the culture, right? So people truly do each other and can do this. And then step 3 is have people, different roles, different people play the devil's advocate, right? So you're discussing a topic. I would even say have one of the chairs in the conference chair could have the title could say devil's advocate. And it's like, okay, who wants to sit in the devil's advocate chair right now? And in fact, I like the idea of opening it up and asking for the volunteer, right?
Y-
Because the person who's got the biggest disagreement might volunteer, right? And they're sitting in the devil's advocate. So now they're overtly in the role of disagreement. And so now you bring that into the conversation. And then from that, other people start coming in, and because now they feel comfortable to add into the disagreement.
I love that chair concept because it frames it so well. You are physically in the chair. Your job is to be the devil's advocate. So you can't get in trouble for it. You can't get in
Exactly.
trouble for it. And I think that alone creates the safety net that people seek out because they don't want to be alone in these kind of conversations.
Yeah, you're underperforming if you're not coming up with dissenting views.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you give me an example of a company that started implementing this? Maybe an executive who wasn't quite creating that environment of safety?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can. I'd love to. It's in my closet, but there was the group that I mentioned before. So there's a team where they were really good people. They were all there for the right reason. Like their altruism score was like really high, meaning like they in the personality test, like they all are there because they want to support and serve others. And they were just great people. And we did like team building stuff. Everybody got along, but nobody dissented. And so I taught them like the 4-player model, which is this idea like, let's put it this way, opposing is one of the 4 roles, right? And so what the administrative assistant did is on Etsy, they bought these blocks, these physical blocks, like big blocks, and on each side of the cube was like a picture depicting the role, right? One was squirrel, like you're being squirrely, and they had the title, right? Oppose or move, the mover, right? And so everybody had their blocks in front of them, and they were to have in front whatever role that they were playing in that moment. And so the invitation was every once in a while, turn your block, right? And say, all right, because you realize nobody's playing the opposer role. Or imagine you're in this team and that John from earlier conversations that John is not aligned with what we're saying. So you reach over and you turn his block, right? They didn't do this, but I'm suggesting they should to take it to the next level. You turn John's block as the opposer, and he looks at that as okay. So I've been nominated, I've been volunteered to be the opposer. All right, so I'm going to be in that role. And so it is a fun way, a visual way of and understanding and recognizing that all these roles are important in these engagements. And and we make it fun and okay to be able to play those different roles and to push back.
I really like these techniques, especially because they create an experience that people can hold on to. It's not just a conversation. You're using visual cues with actual, like, physical chairs and blocks and things. Makes it much more memorable. But what do you say to the executive who looks at that and says, "Oh, we don't play games here?"
Yeah, and
You
that
must have
person,
encountered this.
now his psychological safety score is probably really low,
I'm
right?
sure.
I would, as a coach, I would just say, "Tell me more about that." And he said, "Well, we've got to hit these metrics. We've got these." And is what you're doing now working? Because you told me last week that there's a lot of underperformance, right? That you're losing people, right? Retention is an issue, that you don't quite have the right talent. And so it sounds like what you're doing isn't working. So let me know when you're open to try and do something different. But I don't want it just coming out of your mouth. Oh, I'm ready to do something different. I want you to fully commit to it. Because what I can tell you is these are the things that research, you like data, I like data too. Research shows that these things work. But if you want to keep doing what you're doing, then fine. Then you don't have to do that. That's fine. But I would challenge you that it's not, and invite you that there are other people who have done these kinds of things, and it's been effective. By the way, the reason that you said we're not here to play games is remember your hedonism score in your personality assessment was a 2 out of 100. Yeah, everybody else in your team, it wasn't a 2, right? In fact, you have somebody on your team,
Mm,
as because we did this group, that was 90. So
mm,
they are motivated by fun, right? So if
mm.
you don't want to motivate that person, then you're doing exactly what you need to do. But you have different personalities on your team, which is a good thing because the research shows that diversity of thought, diversity of personality, right? Diversity of ideas, that creates better decisions. So it is your job as a leader to bring out the best in them, and you are not doing it. But if you want to do it, I can show you how.
I love that, and I think the biggest part of this is that you really need to take the pulse of your team. You can't just guess, and you can't just presume that because you're the leader, you're the boss, that you know how it's supposed to be. I think a lot of those data points about how other people interact and what they need for satisfaction in their roles is oftentimes very overlooked. And so I love the idea of assessments, and it's pretty cool that you're creating a way to make that happen a lot faster for companies. Jeff, this has been a really good conversation, especially with all the data points that we covered and techniques. So thanks for that. And I hope this helps other leaders implement psychological safety in their organizations because they're going to be able to retain the talent and attract talent, have a much more cohesive and effective team. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Appreciate it.